Hi there, it's Simon Halliday on the sixth edition of Hallers Playbook. Delighted to see you all tuning in and yet another week of sport, unforgettable sport. And I'm joined by Harry Fry in Australia, which is not a bad place to be at the moment for the sports upsets they've been springing. But before I get going, just like to thank Mass Group, who sponsored this podcast. Multi-asset solutions, dealing in foreign exchange, gold, digital assets, fast-growing asset class, and mass funds. And I'd like to thank them for their support in all of this. It's a fascinating time, isn't it? We've had the Australians turning over the British and Irish Lions. Then they've come to the very heart of South African rugby, if not world rugby, given that they are the current double world champions, and they literally gave them a bloody nose by scoring nearly 40 points in their citadel at Ellis Park. Of course, the rematch is at Cape Town, and there will be a Boca backlash, as everyone keeps telling me, because I'm sitting out here in the Cape, and people are licking their lips in anticipation. Aussies may think they've done their bit and wouldn't mind a heroic defeat. We'll see. Harry might have a view on that. We've also sit here on the edge of probably the most important women's sporting event ever, the Women's Rugby World Cup, which kicks off on Friday. And we're very much hoping that that's going to be a tournament to remember. Of course, the Red Roses are overwhelming favourites. So with that in the background, Harry, part of Mass Group, rugby player extraordinaire. We'll come on to that, but just give me a little bit of a view from down under about what people feel about the Australian Rugby Union team in the wake of their recent results. What's the feeling like down there?
It's a great question, Simon. Well, I've been here for nearly 4 years now, as you're quite right, but love my rugby, always have done. Been involved with rugby here in Australia for a few years as well at club level. And it's amazing. Sport here in general is just amazing, because when Australia are doing well, the whole nation gets behind them, and it's very, very apparent. One thing that I sort of noticed when I first moved here is that Australian Rugby Union, just to clarify, it felt as if it was having a bit of a dip. Wasn't what it once was, but as you just rightly put, that they've had a couple of wins, and all of a sudden everyone's back on the bandwagon. Everybody's super eager to get behind the Wallabies again. So it's exciting times, and it's with the Rugby World Cup just around the corner as well, 2027. It's looking very positive for Australia and the Wallabies.
Yeah, 100%. So I did in the previous editions of Hallers Playbook, I had a fireside chat with Skull Berger, obviously former Springbok, who took that defeat last weekend, and then David Campese, who memorable 40 minutes with him talking about the state of Australian rugby, etc. Do you, just understanding that rugby union is only one of a number of key sports in Australia, where you've got Aussie rules and rugby league, rugby union is still very much a junior sport versus those two big ones. Is that not right?
I could discuss this with you for hours. I know we haven't got hours, but one thing that I've noticed is that, yeah, you're quite right. Rugby league is so prevalent here. This is my opinion and what I've observed. It just seems to be growing bigger and bigger every year. Over the last 3 years, just from my observation, rugby union is just playing catch up with league. Now, I have my own theories as to why that is. I still think union here is seen as a sport for the upper classes, as it was maybe in the UK 30, 40 years ago. I don't know. But yeah, it's from my perspective, it just feels as if league is a lot more, dare I say, accepted by everyone. Union still seems to be a bit of a harder concept for everyone to grasp. But sport as a whole, I mean, you can't go far wrong with Australian sport. So much to choose from, and the nation and the public really do get behind all sports.
Well, we got the 2027 World Cup, as you say. And I said on the record, I felt the Australian side would be super competitive for that World Cup, and it looks like they're well on the track towards that. So, Look, Harry, I want to go back down memory lane a little bit with your rugby
Mhm.
career, and just cover off the fact that you played your rugby in England for the oldest rugby club in the world, Blackheath.
Yeah.
And it always resonates with me, Blackheath, because not only do they have that status, but it's also the first club I ever played against as a first
Mhm.
class rugby player. I was
Yeah.
seconded or forced into playing by Guy's Hospital, who
Mhm.
actually compete with Blackheath being the oldest club.
That's
And I
right.
played against a very, very high-end Blackheath team who put 70 points on us. And it scarred me
Mhm.
forever, really, as my first
Yeah.
ever first-class rugby experience. It was only
Mhm.
matched by that horrendous plunge bath that they had up at the Rectory Field, which still think about it, being incredibly unhygienic. But, Blackheath is your club. It's
It is
called
my
the
club.
club. And I
It is
mean,
the club.
and that for you is probably quite a big part of your kind of not just your sporting life, but being part of an organization like that.
It's probably, without sounding too extreme, the biggest part of my life to date. And I'll give you some context behind that. I even met my wife at Rectory Field. So yeah, my best friends, my wife, everything for me just sort of stemmed around Blackheath Rugby Club, or Blackheath Football Club as it was once called. Um, yeah, I'd sort of dive into that a little bit. For me as a child, I always played rugby because my father played rugby. My dad played for a local team. That's where I grew up, Bexley Rugby Club. And in my early days, running around the rugby club post his matches, I would always hear Blackheath, Blackheath, and it was always put on such a pedestal. And for me, I wanted to be part of that. I was a good rugby player growing up, wasn't the best. As I started going through my teenage years at Blackheath, I sort of progressed and become a good player or a better player. And yeah, I just loved everything that Blackheath had to offer. And for me, it's the history, the culture, the players that went before me. It's just, yeah, so much. I've got so much pride and respect for the rugby club. And I still stay in touch with a lot of the guys there now, even though I'm halfway across, on the other side of the world.
Well, Blackheath is, after all, one of the top 25, 30 clubs in England,
Hmm.
based down there in Kent, and not too far down the road from the proposed site of the Wasps rugby development in Swanley.
Hmm.
We'll wait and see if that actually ever comes to pass, probably a number of years away. Um, but you, and I look back to people like Mickey Skinner, obviously legendary
Yeah, yeah.
rugby players of any era who played for Blackheath. And of course, let's not forget John Gallagher, who's a good friend of mine.
I know John very well.
Obviously,
Yeah.
rugby World Cup winning, All Black at fullback,
Mhm.
and I crossed swords with him a couple of times, and a very hard man to tackle. I distinctly remember. Mickey Skinner was so slow he never got to me, but John definitely was. So tell me a little bit about. See, I played in the entire amateur era. You made
Mhm.
choices. You loved your rugby, and now your journey's sort of taken you to get into financial markets. So, talk
Yeah.
about how that kind of worked in general terms, not mass group yet, because that's specific, but
Yeah, of
the
course.
financial
And
market. What attracted you? Yeah.
this is something that I'm quite a big, I guess you could say, advocate for, because like a lot of people of my age group, we were, I guess you could say, on the cusp of, we saw rugby turn into the professional era from a young age, and it was a dream for a lot of players my age. Well, I was 11 when England won the 2003 Rugby World Cup. At 11, 12 years of age, you start thinking about life choices. Where do you want to go? And for me, it was all about rugby. I wanted to be a professional rugby player. I was dead set on it. However, be careful how I word this, because I don't want to shatter the dreams of others, but professional rugby isn't always for everyone. I was very fortunate enough to leave school at 16 and carry out an apprenticeship with Saracens Rugby Club, along with Oaklands College in Hertfordshire, and it gave me a taste of professional rugby. Now, it is a huge commitment and not always one that a lot of people can handle. I think you have to be super dedicated, very dedicated. I am very fortunate that I found, in my opinion, a sweet spot in semi-professional rugby. So I played in National 1 for 10 years since living here in Australia, I've been fortunate enough to be a part of Manly Rugby Club in the Shute Shield, also semi-professional. And for me, I love how you can have that 9 to 5 job, whether that's in finance, banking, whatever it may be, but also play that competitive rugby, training 2-3 times a week, and having that social element of a rugby club as well. I think that's so important, whether it's professional, semi-professional, grassroots level. I think that's why we all play the game, for the camaraderie.
And look, I listened to you talk about Manly Rugby Club, which is a beautifully appointed club, very close to the coastline. It's that Manly Beach is where the England rugby team and most of the supporters all celebrated that World Cup win. I think everyone went for a swim that day. But Manly Rugby Club is an iconic rugby club. Had a number of top Aussie players playing for it. So, but for you, I guess it's. And remember, anyone who plays top level sport, you're one injury away from never playing again. So it's a huge theme, the life after sport, what business you need to have lined up or at least be qualified for if it goes wrong for you in the sport, which it can do. So you obviously chose financial markets. Quite a big parallel, isn't it? You know, quick thinking, pressurized scenarios, teamwork, all those things that go to make a successful rugby team or any sporting team has a direct correlation into the world of trading and team building, etc., doesn't it?
Definitely. And I almost say this almost a bit tongue in cheek, but the sort of side of the industry or the side of the finance world that I now sit in is I can resemble, like, there's so many resemblance with team sport, with rugby. You have a lot of cheeky chaps. There are a lot of light-hearted moments. So yeah, it's there are a lot of similarities.
And obviously you've got the big end of the market, you know, the multi-billion pound giant financial institutions, where I guess one of the challenges, and I know this from my time, is, you know, how can you make a difference to someone as big as that, you know, JP Morgan and then you've got the other end of the scale, a fast growing, you know, small company, so far, such as Mass Group. So how do you make that decision? You know, the better comfort in a big company, and then a much more dynamic, difference making, because you can make a difference in a small company, can't you?
That's great, very great. That's a great question. For me, I'll sort of take it back a step. I did choose the financial industry. I sort of fell into the financial industry because it was something, again, that my father was always in the industry. He was a security lender for many of the banks in the City of London for 30 plus years. And when rugby sort of wasn't an option for me as a full-time profession, I had to find something to do. I had to find a job. And I saw the rewards and the success my dad had, and I thought I'll give that a go. And I fell into the broking side of things. I was working for an institution-only stockbrokers, answering calls, client calls, placing orders over the telephone, and I loved it. I loved the client service side of it. I loved what broking had to offer. And over the next few years, I explored a few options, and I actually found myself in a role with JP Morgan Asset Management in London. And going back to my point about how professional rugby might not be for everyone, but semi-professional sport or semi-professional rugby might be a better option, I found something similar in the financial industry. Although it was great working for JP Morgan and I had this great name on my CV, I didn't feel as valued as I did at a smaller, more bespoke brokerage or a smaller company. Again, it's, in my opinion, it's horses for courses. It was great working at JP Morgan, but what I was doing on a day-to-day basis, I didn't really see the value I was adding to JP Morgan. Post JP Morgan, I then went and worked for other smaller firms, and you can really see the part you play within that company. So I've digressed a bit there, but I hope that.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting point you make. I guess your sporting skills and your teamship skills can be much more impactful in a smaller company, can't they? Because there aren't that just by sheer force of numbers, and the fact that if you bring everyone together in a small organization, you can see the impact of it really quickly.
Exactly.
In a much bigger organization, it can either be missed or take a lot longer, or by the time it happens, you're not in the seat, so they're thinking it's someone else's efforts.
That's right.
So you
Correct.
get that much more. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you get much more feeling of making that difference and seeing the benefits of that in a small organization such as a Mass Group.
Correct. Yeah.
And talk to me about one of the things that Mass has a clear mandate to grow is the whole digital world. I said in a previous podcast that clearly we need to pay attention because Rachel Reeves is trying to pay off some of the UK national debt with Bitcoin. But there is an awful lot of growth in the regulation and the acceptance of alternative assets. So digital assets is a huge piece of where I think the financial markets are going. And just explain a little bit about how Mass is coping with that or dealing with that growth trend.
Yeah, well, it's
World.
especially here in Australia and across the Asia Pacific region, it's huge. The clients that we have onboarded through Mass Markets, I'd say Mass Australia, 90% of them heavily rely on digital assets for funding their trading accounts. It's no secret that, in my opinion, digital assets, they're not going anywhere. They're here to stay, and I think especially again here in APAC, it's a necessity.
And so, how do you explain the risk? A lot of people, whether it be the dollar, whether it be gold, whether it be other formal currencies, the euro, etc. Is well understood, but the euro wasn't always there. People had to buy into what that looked like.
Yeah.
How do you describe the risk to people who don't know about digital assets?
Yeah, that's good. That's also a good question. It's a difficult one because in our position as well, we don't offer financial advice. We're not in a position to offer financial advice, so we try and steer away from that. Our clients are professional clients. They have to do their own due diligence, their own KYC, and if it's not something they're comfortable doing, I would hate to sort of talk to that point. It's hard. That's a great question. I'm one of the struggle to answer, to be quite honest.
I think it's one of the biggest challenges for anyone in the space will be as it grows and grows to control the risk and the regulation of these assets, because what people don't know, they can sometimes fear.
Yes.
And that kind of leading me into how you see the future from your standpoint. You worked in a very big company, as you described, JP Morgan, and then you've working in a much smaller but faster growing company. So how do you see the future? Do you feel that the people are going to migrate more from the bigger to the smaller? They'll get, customer service and relationship. How do you feel those are drivers of the future?
Well, from two standpoints, I think what we see in our space, the CFD space, is there's more. There are so many companies starting up. Seems like every month, every 2 months, there's a new institutional provider, a new retail brokerage. Now, what the longevity of those companies are not always worth reporting, but there's always more and more new companies. So I feel as if people are stepping away from an employee's perspective. I feel as if people are stepping away from the bigger institutions, having to go at their own thing or joining those that they know at smaller, more bespoke companies. In terms of client base, I feel clients probably still favour the bigger institutions, the bigger names, but there are so many benefits to using the services of smaller brokers, maybe a bit more flexibility, more hand-holding in terms of client service. So, I think there is definitely a space for the smaller startup entrepreneurs in our space.
And why Australia, Harry? What was the big attraction?
So,
honestly, for a company like Mass, the opportunity to be overseas and
hmm
exploit growth markets is clearly there. You're
hmm
sitting there. What drove you to Australia?
So my wife's Australian. So we had a young daughter post COVID or 20, back end of 2021. We was in London, and it seemed like a good time to move to Australia. In our opinion, a better way of life for children. I actually had a job with another brokerage when I first arrived here. Um, I guess I don't want to portray this in a bad light either, but to my point earlier, I felt as if I wasn't adding as much value as I would have liked to at this company. And then the CEO and founder of Mass Group, Simon Blackledge, was a contact of mine many, many years ago in London. He knew I was unhappy. We've always had quite a close relationship anyway, quite an open relationship. Simon knew I was unhappy and he said, look, I'm expanding. Mass were at the time, we were called Bidex. And he said, oh, we're expanding. Why don't you help me start up the business in Australia, focus on the APAC region? And for me, it was an opportunity I couldn't turn down, really. So I was already in Australia. That was a perk. But then to be given the opportunity to help start up the entity here was, life-changing.
Well, that's a great story, and there's obviously, you talked at the top of the call about the opportunity to make it as a pro rugby player, and for every pro
Yeah.
rugby player that does make it, there's a huge number that don't, and some of them are prepared well for. Because I talked about one injury away, but you're also one selection decision away from having to think about something else to do. So if you're sitting, imagine I'm an academy player. I'm at the beginning of my rugby career. What advice are you going to give? Experience you've had. What advice are you going to give those sorts of people at the stages of
Well,
their career?
always have a plan B. Always think about alternative options because, as you said, it can come crashing down very, very quickly. I left. Well, I carried out my apprenticeship for my equivalent to sixth form education. Again, with the mindset of being a professional rugby player, I was fortunate enough to play some academy games for Saracens, and then I was sat down at the end of my sort of education apprenticeship and said, "Thank you for your time. It's been great." Shook hands, and I was just a bit stumped. Where do I go from here? I was going to be a professional rugby player, and it didn't happen. And I chased it for 2-3 years afterwards. I spent some time playing in New Zealand, North Otago. Tried to chase the dream back in the UK, but I quickly sort of, again, when I come back to Blackheath, found myself working in the financial industry, getting paid a match fee to play on a Saturday, training 2 days a week. I thought, this isn't too bad. I can focus on a career. I have a good job. I can have a life outside of rugby. So for me, I just sort of thrived at that opportunity and the fact that it wasn't all about rugby, but still enjoying rugby at the same time.
I think it's a great balance. I remember vividly in my kind of penultimate year, going to Australia with England on a tour, Australia and Fiji. 1 week later, having got back after 5 weeks, we had a 7-week Rugby World Cup. So I was away from home for 3 months, away from the office for 3 months, and getting back into the office, the manager felt so sorry for me. He said, "Why don't you take 2 weeks off?" I said, "Well, I've already been away for 12 weeks,"
Yeah.
and so that was the unsustainable nature of
Yeah.
amateur rugby turning pro. And
Mm-hmm,
so I think the life after rugby issue is one that's still not been sorted. And so, do you think companies have a role to play? And I've often
Well,
said,
I know that a lot of companies now are, especially firms in the cities and in the financial industry, are partnering with some of these Premiership sides or more established rugby clubs to help develop pathways for players. But it's hard to say, but I think a lot of it does fall on the clubs. Maybe they can set expectations better. I don't know, but I've seen it. I've seen it, Simon. I've been at Blackheath, and we've had players come on loan from Wasps or London Welsh when London Welsh are in the Premiership, and they're only young lads themselves, and you can see that there's not really any backup plan, and they haven't gone on to play professional rugby, and it's sad because you think so many, and also on sort of in conjunction with that, you get players that get to the age of 32, 33, 34. They're still playing rugby in the Championship, which is not a problem, but they've still got this aspiration of being a professional rugby player. But then by the time you're 35, 40, probably too late. Never too late, but you're on the back foot starting a career if you need to start a career, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's look. I think it's a really important point for any individual who engages in sport, and I think I do think companies do have responsibility if they get involved in sponsoring sport. If sport is a big sporting ethos, a big part of their world, they need to show some commitment, and that's something that it's too sporadic in my book. And you've kind of highlighted that as well. So the message to anyone indulging in any sport, you've got to have a plan B because you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Another kind of piece of our sport that is right at the beginning of that journey is the women's game. And whether it be in sevens or in 15s, we've got the Rugby World Cup here in over in England, and the Australians have got some top women rugby players. I saw some of them playing sevens. Is there any PR around that in Australia at the moment? In fact, there's a Women's Rugby World Cup taking place, or have we still got to grow that awareness?
Well, women's sport here is massive as well, and I'm sure it is the world over. It's become bigger and bigger, but rugby in general for the women's sport here, league, sevens, union, it gets as much recognition now as the men's game. In my opinion, you see it on TV advertisements. It's brilliant. I haven't seen so much about the Rugby World Cup. Maybe it's still to come, but the women's game here is impressive. I've got 2 young daughters myself, and dare I say it, I'd be very eager for them to lace up the boots one day, especially with the opportunities there is here for women's rugby. And it's interesting.
I do think
a lot of the women, a lot of the ladies here that play, they'll go from league to union to sevens, and they manage to squeeze it all in, which is very impressive.
I think it's we reflect on this seminal moment in time, actually, and the Wallaroos, as they're called, isn't it? That they'll come over here, and we know they're going to be competitive because we've seen a lot of their sevens players. But following on from the Euros, which was very high profile, which the Lionesses won, the fact that the new cricket franchises are encouraging women's cricket all around the world, and now you've got the Rugby World Cup. They're going to put 40,000 people into the Stadium of Light in Sunderland, which you could only have. You'd have laughed if someone had suggested that was going to happen. And the Rugby World Cup final is sold out. Before the tournament started, they've sold 82,000 tickets. So it's an incredible moment of time for a sport at a completely different stage of journey than the one you and I played. You played professionally. I didn't. But it's an exciting thing. And England are expected to win. That's the bit I don't like, because you got this pressure, which is one on expectation in your home country. And
you look at England,
you can't afford to slip up.
It was a similar thing for the men's side, right? In 2015, we didn't make it out the group stages.
Well, exactly. And I lost in a World Cup final against Australia in 1991, which Mr. Campisi would never let me forget. So
was that October 91?
That was October 1991. That's right.
Yeah, I think it was the week before. I think it was the week before I was born, because there's a picture of my dad holding me as a baby, and all of a sudden he's got a Wallabies jersey on. So he quickly switched sides. Yes, well,
we got our own back 12 years later. It did take quite a while, though. So, but look, as you've already said, you were in the middle of a sporting paradise in Australia, and if you had to sort of look at crystal ball 5 years on, and Mass Group growing again and again and again. I mean, there's so much to go for. This is a company that's ranked the 32nd quickest growing companies in the UK. But it sounds like the opportunity from an overseas perspective is also incredibly significant in your region, and the way that clients and investors are behaving in a new world of AI, of digitization, of alternative assets. And you're
Yeah,
part of that story.
yeah, yeah. It's one I'm very, very proud of, actually. And in 5 years' time, I'd like to think that we've expanded again, more offices, more different locations, jurisdictions. This industry is not going anywhere. It's just about evolving and adapting with it as it grows. So I think at Mass Group, we're very good at doing that. Very good at moving with the times, adapting, looking at ways to improve our offering, improve our service. So it's exciting times.
And look, everything you just said there is what all good businesses should be doing: damage testing their model, looking to grow, looking to improve. I think that's where the Springboks are going to be for this weekend in Cape Town, trying to improve against Australia, or else
Yep.
people will be calling a turn. And perhaps after all of that questioning and the Eddie Jones fiasco was it a fiasco, or was he a visionary? No doubt he'll be claiming credit for the turnaround in Australian rugby, and you'll be approaching 2027 with a lot of optimism. So a split household there, the Fry household, a true Blue English supporter, and obviously an Aussie fan. So, but there we are. I'm sure you'll deal with that.
Well, I'm very pro. I'm very pro Eddie Jones, which is a lot of people are surprised to hear that. But for me, he just screams old school rugby coach, and you can see he gets the best out of players. Bit of a taskmaster by the sounds of it, but I'd have loved to have played under Eddie.
Well, Eddie, who knows? Perhaps I'll drag Eddie on to talk to us about his philosophy of coaching. And he's definitely a very amusing guy, and I've only ever seen him from a distance. But look, Harry, thank you for sharing those thoughts with us. And we look ahead to the Rugby Women's World Cup, and a Rugby World Cup winner will be joining us next week to talk about her experiences and how she feels the game has changed. So that's to come. So that's it from Hallers Playbook this week. Thank you to Harry Fry. Thank you to Mass Group, and we'll see you again soon.